The eyes that never blinked. The haunting of Durness Hollow.
Before we begin this chilling story, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon and let me know in the comments what you liked about the story.
I've never told anyone this story, but I can't keep it buried anymore. Not after what happened. Some things, they eat away at you, consume you slowly until there's nothing left but a husk filled with hollow screams. You can only swallow your guilt for so long. It started with the eyes. Their glassy, unblinking stares followed me everywhere. No matter where I went in town, I could feel them watching me, waiting. But I guess I should start at the beginning, or as close to it as I can remember. It's hard to piece things together when memories claw at you like shadows in a dark room. My name's Emily. I was 16 when we moved to Durness Hollow, a small, suffocating town hidden deep within a valley surrounded by twisted woods. A town you don't find on maps. A town that doesn't want you to leave. It was just me, my mom, and my little brother, Nate. After Dad died, Mom thought a change of scenery would help us start fresh. That's what people say when they don't want to admit they're running from something. She never told me what really happened between her and Dad, why his body was found hanging from that beam in the garage. It wasn't suicide, I'll take that to my grave. But Durness Hollow, that place, it was worse than anything we'd left behind. We moved into an old house at the edge of town. It had been abandoned for years, but Mom got it for cheap. I should have known something was wrong when we met the landlord, Mr. Abernathy, with his crooked grin and long, bony fingers. He didn't speak much, just handed us the keys and warned us about the woods in his raspy voice. "Stay clear of the trees at night," he said, his pale blue eyes glistening. "Things wander out there after dark. Things that don't belong in this world." Mom laughed it off, but I remember the way Nate clung to her leg, wide-eyed and trembling. I felt it too, a heaviness in the air, like we'd just walked into something we weren't supposed to, but there was no turning back now. At first, the house seemed normal enough, I guess. Dusty, sure. Creaky floors, peeling wallpaper. It smelled of mildew and old wood, but that was to be expected in a place like this. Nate and I settled into our rooms, and for the first few weeks, nothing out of the ordinary happened. But then I started seeing the children. They appeared at the edge of the yard, near the tree line, always at dusk. At first, it was just one girl with long, tangled hair and a dirty white dress. She stood perfectly still, staring at me from a distance. I told myself it was just a local kid playing, but when I looked closer, something was wrong. Her eyes, they weren't right. They were too bright, too shiny, like glass marbles. They didn't blink. I told Mom, but she brushed it off. "You've got an overactive imagination, Emily. It's just kids being kids." But it wasn't just kids. Every day more of them would gather. First, there were 2, then 5, then 8, always standing at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting. Their clothes were old-fashioned, their skin pale as moonlight. But those eyes, God, those eyes, they haunted me in my sleep. Then came the whispers. Late at night, I'd hear them through the walls, soft, hissing voices, like the wind through dead leaves. Sometimes they sounded like children giggling, other times like someone calling my name. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, but when I listened closer, the house was silent. The nightmares started soon after. I'd dream of the children standing in my room, their faces pale and featureless, their mouths stretched into grotesque grins. In the dreams, they would crawl into my bed, their cold, bony fingers wrapping around my throat, suffocating me. I'd wake up gasping for air, only to find nothing there, just the darkness and the sound of my own breathing. But the worst part wasn't the nightmares. It was Nate. He started acting strange, withdrawn, and quiet. He barely spoke to me anymore, and when he did, his voice sounded off, like it wasn't really him talking. His eyes, once full of life, were dull and distant, like he was staring at something far away, something I couldn't see. One night, I caught him standing at the window, staring out at the woods. His face was pale, his lips moving silently. When I asked him what he was doing, he didn't answer. He just pointed to the trees and said, "They want me to come play." I pulled him away from the window and told him to go back to bed, but the look on his face chilled me to the bone. He wasn't scared. He looked eager, like he wanted to go with them. That night, I decided to follow him. It was a few hours past midnight when I heard Nate's bedroom door creak open. I slipped out of bed and tiptoed after him, keeping my distance. He walked down the hallway, his footsteps soft and slow, like he was in a trance. He didn't even flinch when he reached the back door and opened it without a sound. Outside, the air was thick with mist, the trees looming like shadowed sentinels. Nate walked toward the woods, and I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. The closer we got to the tree line, the colder the air became, like it was draining the warmth from my body. And then I saw them, the children. They stood in a circle at the edge of the woods, their glassy eyes fixed on Nate. Their mouths were moving, but I couldn't hear what they were saying, just soft whispers carried in the wind. Nate walked straight toward them, and for a moment, I was paralyzed with fear. But then I snapped out of it and ran toward him, grabbing his arm. "Stop!" I shouted, yanking him away from the children. "We have to go back." Nate turned to me, his eyes blank, his voice hollow. "But they need me. They want me to play with them." I didn't know what to say. I just pulled him away, dragging him back to the house. The children didn't follow, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching as we stumbled back inside. That's when the truth started unraveling. I began to dig into the town's history, desperate for answers. Durness Hollow had always been isolated, but it wasn't always empty. Decades ago, the town had been home to a large orphanage, St. Hale's Home for Children. In 1943, a fire tore through the building, killing over 30 children and the nuns who cared for them. The bodies were never recovered. The fire had consumed them whole. But that wasn't the worst part. The town's records hinted at something darker, something people didn't want to talk about. Before the fire, children had gone missing, disappearing from their homes without a trace. Some said it was the woods, that the trees were cursed. Others whispered about an old family, the Kincaids, who had once lived in the mansion at the edge of town. The Kincaids had been a twisted bunch practicing dark rituals, sacrificing animals, maybe even people. They believed the woods were a gateway to something beyond, something ancient. When the children started disappearing, the townsfolk blamed the Kincaids, and one night they took matters into their own hands. They burned the mansion to the ground with the Kincaids still inside. But here's the thing, no one ever found the bodies. The Kincaids didn't die in that fire, they just disappeared. I couldn't shake the feeling that the children I'd seen, the ones with the glassy eyes, weren't just ghosts. They were something else, something the Kincaids had brought back with them. And now they wanted Nate. That's when I knew I had to leave. I packed a bag and tried to convince Mom to go, but she wouldn't listen. She said I was overreacting, that it was all in my head, but I could see it in her eyes. She was scared too, but she didn't want to admit it, so I did what I had to do. That night, I waited until Nate was asleep. I grabbed him, threw him over my shoulder, and ran. I didn't care where we went, as long as it was far away from that town, from those woods. But the moment I stepped outside, I knew it was too late. They were waiting for us. The children, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight, stood in a circle around the house, and in the center of them I saw the woman in the white dress, her face pale and smooth, her eyes like glass. She smiled at me, and I felt my blood turn to ice. "Give him back," she whispered, her voice soft and sweet. "He belongs with us now." I turned and ran, but I could hear them behind me, the sound of their footsteps, soft and light, like leaves rustling in the wind. I didn't stop, not until I reached the road, and when I looked back, they were gone. We left Durness Hollow that night, but I've never been able to escape it. Nate doesn't remember anything, not the children, not the whispers, not the woman in white. But I remember. Every night, I see their faces in my dreams, hear their voices calling my name, and sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear them laughing.